So I can start. My part starts with one point because I really know a lot about Hannah Arendt before the 2022, but I wrote like a special essays in university about political theory of Kant and so on and so on, but it was some kind of formal meeting. And I understand it later when 2022 comes, and so I will tell you a story about like my really personal, deep meeting with her. It was in Zaporizhia. I stood in a bookstore, not knowing what to do with my life, and because Kharkiv University was operating remotely, and many things were really ununderstandable. Then I see the book Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report of the banality of evil, and I understand that in Zaporizhia, suddenly evil, which had always been merely an abstraction, became like something really. So when I see this book, I had heard about this book many times, and many professors, they mentioned it. And it was an important text in our university. Full of students added it to their reading list. But there was never enough time to think about evil for me. At least it was never actualized enough for time to appear. Now everything was different, and now there was time. So a week in Zaporizhia cafes with this book revealed something unexpected for me. Evil can be ridiculous, not in the sense of dark humor, because war is not funny and suffering is not funny, but in the sense of absurdity, illogicality, and like in the sense of astonishing stupidity. So Arendt showed me that evil is ridiculous not because it distorts reality, that's precisely not funny, but because it's incapable of operating through reason, it has no real agency. Feeding of remnants what Kant called practical reason. So I will give you a quote. I think you heard about this book, like Eichmann in Jerusalem. It's a really important book for understanding the history of 20th century and the history of Holocaust. But here, Hannah Arendt started to analyze like how Kant, how Eichmann thinks, because we know like this moral law of Kant, like to use practical reason, to be moral, and Eichmann knows about it a lot, but he used it in a different sense. So here's a quote. Such a possibility of obedience of Eichmann never occurred to Kant, who held that every man in acting becomes a legislator using his practical reason. Man finds the principles that could and should be the principles of law. But Eichmann's unconsciousness distortions accord with what he himself calls a version of Kant for the household use of the little man. In his household use, all that is left of Kant's spirit is a demand that a man do more than obey the law, that he go beyond the mere call of obedience and identifying his own will with the principle behind the law, the source from which the law sprang. In Kant's philosophy, that source was practical reason. In Eichmann's household use of him, it was the will of Führer. So, do you understand this horror? Because Eichmann didn't reject ethics at all. He replaced its source. Instead of his own thinking about moral norms, he simply took ready-made orders. So, he remained ethical only like in the sense of Führer will. So Eichmann was not a sadist who enjoyed the evil, but a bureaucrat who had stopped thinking, and he was a perfect executor, a person without agency. And this is the real horror. Evil doesn't need monsters. It's enough to have people who have stopped thinking for themselves. So, but my next point of communication with Hannah Arendt was because of William Morris. Does somebody here know about William Morris? Okay, it's good. So I make a mystery, and you can check it later on the internet because it's quite interesting theme, but we don't have enough time for that. So Morris was a 19th century designer. He's really famous because he's the first designer in the history of art and so on and so on. But my point in another space, because my true understanding of Arendt came through my long-standing fascination with William Morris. And it was a question like what 19th century art critic and a 20th century political philosopher possibly have in common. So when Morris delivered his famous lecture, The Decorative Arts, he wasn't just talking about art. He diagnosed a fundamental crisis of modern civilization. It's not possible to dissociate art from morality, politics, and religion, he said. And he also said that the problem wasn't that art became ugly, but that it had become dead, severed from the living process of creation. So Morris wrote with pain that the workman is nothing now but a human machine to be used up in preparing the goods for the market. He wrote it in 19th century, and he saw how the Industrial Revolution was destroying not just the beauty of things, but the very joy of creation. The master craftsman, who had once been a co-author with his material, was transformed into appendage of the machine. And it's also about acting without agency, like about acting because of somebody's will. Morris understood that the problem ran deeper than economic exploitation, and he said that the aim of art is to increase the happiness of men, and giving them beauty and interest of incident and to amuse their leisure, and prevent them wearying even of rest, and by giving them hope and bodily pleasure in their work. Art for him was not entertainment after work, but the way work itself becomes a form of self-realization. So if we are trying to think about it, we will see how, like the master stonecutter who made a Gothic cathedral was a co-author of his own world. Each stone could become part of his story, his creative expression within a communal project. So the factory worker performs the same hand movement thousands of times until the end of life, without choice, without participation in creating meaning. Nearly a century later, Hannah Arendt formulated a similar diagnosis, but at the level of political philosophy. She wrote it, and you can see the quote, that what we are confronted with is a prospect of society of laborers without labor, that is, without the only activity left to them. Like Morris, she saw the problem not simply in bad outcomes, but in the destruction of the very forms of life and human activity. People become consumers of goods, services, and even politics. They cease to be co-authors of their own lives. Citizens become clients of political services. Action transforms into behavior. So Arendt proposed some answers. Here you see her methodology. She doesn't stop at diagnosis, where Morris dreamed of reviving the living crafts. Arendt shows the way back to agency through what she calls action. If Morris wanted to restore the co-authorship between craftsmen and material, Arendt seeks to restore co-authorship between people and their common world. She distinguished three types of human activity. You see it here. The labor, it's like cyclical maintenance of life. Then the work is to creating objects, and then the action is the most important because it happens directly between people. So action, she said, the only activity that goes on directly between men without the intermediary of things or matter. Action is unique, and what is more important is unpredictable, because when people gather and begin to act together, no one can predict the results. Maidan, for example, Maidan as a political event in Ukraine began as a protest against one agreement. And then it changed the country, the continent, and the world. The actor, Hannah Arendt wrote it, never quite knows what he is doing. The one who acts never fully knows what they are doing. The meaning of action is revealed post factum through the story about it. But it's precisely in this unpredictability that lies the possibility of the real freedom, the possibility to break out of formal schemes and create something new. So action is also a form of thinking, because here we reach Arendt's deepest intuition. She said that action overcomes the separation between theory and practice, and with it, the formalization that destroys agency at all. Remember how Eichmann replaced his own practical reason with the Führer's will. So action restores this unity of thinking and doing that formalization destroys. Power corresponds to the human ability not just to act, but to act in a conquered. Through action, we simultaneously understand the world and transform it. This is not the abstract contemplation that philosophy traditionally valued, nor the mindless execution that modern labor demands, both of which leave people without real agency. Action is a form of thinking, but thinking that is realized in community with others. In the opposite of Eichmann household Kant, where thinking was outsourced to authority, the realm where freedom has always dwelt was the political realm, said Hannah Arendt. Freedom is not an abstract ability to choose, but a concrete possibility to think and act together. So in action, we don't first develop a theory and then apply it. We think through acting, discover new possibilities through doing. The political actor reclaims agency by thinking through words and deeds while working with others, refusing both the formalized ethics and the bureaucrat and the formalized laborer at the factory. So, Ukrainian society after 2014 demonstrates this powerfully. Action can be judged only by the criterion of greatness, because it is in its nature to break through the commonly accepted and reach into the extraordinary. People though through acting, so they discovered new forms of solidarity and resistance through the process of creating them, the exact opposite of the non-agency that enables evil. So here we have some challenges for our transformative research, because today we face the same crisis that Morris and Hannah Arendt had. So formalization has touched everything: art, politics, education, and now science itself. And academic research risks becoming another form of bureaucratic labor, where scholars execute predetermined and methodologies rather than thinking through problems. But our question is, can research become a form of action? Can we restore agency to thinking itself? Thinking without any banisters, or as Hannah Arendt called it, thinking that doesn't lack itself into disciplinary schemes, but moves in the space of living being. Thinking that refuses to outsource its authority to methodological procedures, just as an action refuses to outsource its power to institutional hierarchies. Transformative research is an attempt to create a space where thinking becomes a form of joint action, where researchers and practitioners together create new possibilities for understanding and transformation, rather than simply applying existing frameworks to new problems. So, because the banality of evil is overcome not by grand words or sophisticated theories, but by the living action of thinking. Action that restores to us co-authorship of our own lives, our own understanding, and our own world. So here I will stop and give the floor to Masha, who will tell us about natality as a first condition to action.
This is one talk by the three of us, and it's not a linear talk, but we'll speak. Is it possible to hear? Okay. But we'll speak, yeah, thanks. We'll speak about the same about the same topic, entering the same topic from three different points. And my point through which I try to enter is this point of natality. So Hannah Arendt, and we will explain in a moment, Hannah Arendt has natality as a fact of human life. So in some way, I'll try to come back to Nastya's point, but just entering differently. But the first question, there is this clicker somewhere.
You're sitting on it.
Thanks. So this is the entering point of natality. The first question is, how does Hannah Arendt work or approach, or not work, but actually act as a researcher? And she has a method asking about the human condition. And this method is to ask, looking at the facts that make our life. So everything which is part of our life also becomes the condition, as it forms our life as it is as a whole. And this question to ask about condition is not the same as asking about the essence or the nature of human life itself. So what's the difference? The question of what conditions our life, it's not a substitute for the second one. It's not a substitute for the question of what the essence is, and rather it is like a pointer. It is almost like an introduction to the second question. None of the conditions of our lives determines our life absolutely. They provide a starting point for talking about what our human life is, by talking about how it actually is. And all those conditions can change, but when they are as they are, they allow us to say what forms the story of human life, how it can be, how human life can be. And this is not about a framework to conclude from the outside what human life holds in the totality of its potential. The question of the condition of human life is thus not a question of the whole of who man or woman is. It is a question about what life can be. And Hannah Arendt leaves out this question of who man is, so this whole framework of all of the potential. She leaves it out because she says we can only, or we can answer by entering through this pointer of what actually describes the human story. So we can be aware of that she is leaving out a question and giving us another one, and we will come back to this. Action is what makes the human story. But at some point of her path of asking what conditions human life, she comes most closely to this, to unveiling who man is. And this happens through when we tell the whole of a person's story. So the biography, in its completion, also in its completion after the end of a person's life. And for her, it's important that this story, this question of who man is not answered through the productivity. So know what he reaches or accomplishes. It is really in the story somebody tells through his life. In the story which reveals who somebody is in its action. And the story is conditioned also by the circumstances, by all of the circumstances in which a person lives. Somehow we already started to, or for me it's maybe one of the simplest way to answer what action is, what Nastya tried to explain by this division, and Hannah Arendt tries to explain by separating it from work and labor. But I think action is what weaves the human story. So everything we can tell through a biography of a person, as a biography of a person, the thinking, the thing a person can be told, the thing in which a person can be told, this is human action. So what conditions action? What conditions how we can tell a human story? And the most simple things, the most kind of basic things is the human life story has a beginning and an end. A human is born and dies. And everything that we can say about a human life, everything a human life story can be given is in this condition. It has a beginning and an end. And from the perspective of within one human life, so if we are in the position of one single person, the point that we see from this two is actually the end. So if it is a life story and we take the perspective from within and start to think about it, the point that we see is not the beginning, but actually the end. So, and this is why Hannah Arendt says that for philosophy, since Plato, death has been the decisive category-forming fact of igniting thought. So philosophy kind of takes this perspective from within being, and this is why from these two conditions it sees the end point, death, as the category from which it which ignites thought. So the perspective from which human life through birth, Hannah Arendt, and this is I think what is unique and why we need her in all of this, that she says political thought takes the perspective not only from within, but it takes the perspective of world-human relation. So it steps out of the perspective from within one being, but it looks at world-human relation, and out of this perspective you see human life which enters through birth into the world, while the world itself has been there before. So we have now, if we leave this perspective from within being and try to take the perspective where we see relations, we kind of see that the world is something that's been there before, and birth is a fact through which humans enter into this more stable world. And so in this perspective, birth is not just a natural fact, but it is a fact that arrives from this format of looking at the world-human relationship. Too early. And this sounds as if Hannah Arendt would change discipline, as if she would start from philosophy, leave philosophy, and enter into politics. But the important discipline here is not philosophy or politics, but it's both in some way philosophical thought or political thought. So for her, the discipline that she pursues is actually thinking. This is something she learned through her teacher in this discipline. We will talk about him also. Who, for him, it is philosophy kind of escaped thinking escaped the captivity of philosophy, where it was put in a metaphysical system and also in, was captive in a dialectic logic. And thought itself is not thinking, and this is something Hannah Arendt writes about Heidegger for his 80th birthday. She writes, thought itself is not thinking about something, but it is in a transitive sense thinking something. So it's kind of not just thinking, looking at something, thinking about something, but thinking something. So putting something into moving, into move. And this is her actual discipline, this kind of thinking. And I think it's really important for us if we are asking what transformative research is, also what Nastya started to talk about. I think every time we enter a discipline like a format, we are kind of stepping out of reality. So to enter a discipline, we need to step out of reality. And for Hannah Arendt, Heidegger started this, or taught her this thinking from out of being, which also changes being because it moves in being. And she kind of continues it first by leaving this solitude perspective, by thinking relations, and this is really unique about her, and also by entering into political thinking. So kind of not moving into a discipline, but staying with your thinking inside of the reality. So this is I think this is why we need Hannah Arendt, and this is also what distinguishes her from Heidegger. We are not staying in this perspective from within being, which has only death at its most decisive point because it sees only death. But we can think different relations because we are making thinking historic thinking, philosophical thinking, and political thinking, and this is why we can see relations. So through thought now, it becomes visible that the very crucial thing about human action for the human story is that it has a beginning. And a beginning means, in relation to the world, it enters as something new, something that has not been there before, and before it entered, nothing could fully determine it. Nothing fully captured this. The system which was there before can never fully describe what is entering there and can thus never put it into laws. Because our story has a starting point and also an end, this conditions the whole story as one in time. So what I'm trying to say here, it's not about, why is it important, why we're talking about this? It's not just about this first moment of birth. this is the point where something new enters. It also actually makes our whole life as one in time. Because our whole life is one in time, for Hannah Arendт, all what we do in our story is revealing more and more this first point of entering. So beginning is not just this first point where we are born, but beginning continues on. Our whole life continues to unfold as a newness. The continuation of the story is one continuous self-sharing of this novelty of birth into the world. The self-sharing of the newness of birth happens in speech and action. So this is the next point. Each human life story enters and continues to be something unforeseen, and thus also uncontrollable. It is a novelty that can bring out not only changes, but specifically non-continuous changes. So changes that are not conceived beforehand. And my last point, before I also speak about what it means for us now, is plurality, because I want to distinguish between diversity and plurality. Because when something is new, the first way we describe this newness is it's different. If something new enters, oh, this is different, this has not been foreseen before. But difference or diversity is not enough for Hannah Arendт. Difference, and this is actually what she says, diversity is something that also is there in plants and animals, so it's not connected to human action specifically. And action is conditioned not only by the fact that we are different, but by the fact that in one's acting, one is gaining a very distinct voice. So somehow we are not only different, but somehow in our acting, what happens through our action is not only that we are different, but we are kind of gaining our own voice, which is different, but it's also our own. Through acting, I'm not only saying I'm different from the others, I'm telling the world my own story. I'm creating and gaining my voice. And this is what is plurality, in difference to diversity. Plurality does not exist in the mere fact of people being different, but it is embodied by different people acting in their own way, co-creating the common polis. And this connects to natality for me. What is born into the world is not only a difference in this world, and this would mean if what is born is only a difference, it would leave the world unchanged somehow. So we would have this divide into the subject, who is kind of different, and the whole world, which is an object. But because we have plurality, we don't have this divide anymore. We are entering the world. This is our subject kind of is entering the world, but because we start to act in the world, so we are contributing a voice in the world, we also become part of the world. The newborn, by being by revealing his novelty to the world through speech and action, thus becoming a voice in the world, makes both a unique person and also an integration into the world, and it makes a person part of the plurality of the world. Okay, what does it have to do all with us, all these points? The method to ask about the human condition. So the diagnosis of the crisis has been made about our time today quite often. And recent example for me is the Ukrainian philosopher, and I heard the Ukrainians heard this name, but probably for all the foreigners it will be maybe a new name. Anatoly Akhutin, he's a philosopher who right now lives in Ukraine, who lived in Russia before. But since 2014 he is in Ukraine. In his book Turning Times, he has an interview about his book Turning Times, where he describes it like this. My book is about pivotal times in European history. Today we are living through a turning point on a global scale. Such times are commonly referred as a crisis. And the Greek word crisis originally means a judgment, a decision. And right now world history is experiencing such a decisive moment. And the unsettling part, what's really hard to understand is who is judging us. So if it's a judgment, who is judging us and by what laws? And I find it quite remarkable how clearly it is felt by the people inside of Ukraine. And I think this could be also interesting for those who are coming from abroad. How clearly it is felt by people inside Ukraine that this crisis is global, is on a global scale, even though the local involvement could possibly distract from seeing this global scale. This crisis is happening on so many levels, not least society Not least, society is only gradually assimilating into the new architecture of communication, which is fundamentally changing society's form. This is deeply intertwined with geopolitical issues and the question of cultural coexistence. So what I mean is that and we are deeply involved with this, that it's also connected through technology. And Hannah Arendt also saw this interconnection of geopolitics and technology. We will not speak about this too much, but I think maybe we'll keep in mind this topic. Maybe a little bit today evening, Epstein will speak about this. So inside a crisis, words change their meaning. Concepts do not stay what they are. And pivotal points mean that it's only harder, but also in some sense dangerous, to try to answer the question of essence. And for me, this comes to this first point we were making about the human condition. So I think in our time, it's even harder to answer this question of who human being is, because so much is changing also through technology, that everything we are putting as an answer to this question can be revealed as something that we just haven't foreseen changing. It's kind of our missing experience, and who human being is could be revealed as changing and changing again. So actually asking about human condition allows us to see how these conditions can change, and how this. It's maybe in exactly in our time of crisis, entering through Hannah Arendt's method about asking about human condition and also seeing the changes of this human condition can help us. Is maybe the more fitting question. The discovery of action has already taken place in Ukraine since 2014. I cannot unveil anything new in this talk here, because a lot is being discovered and written by this, and mainly also practiced. And we will today hear those people who are, I think, great example of this practice. And all I can say here that maybe this is the really interesting point to learn from Ukrainian experience. And Ukrainian experience in this offers enormous potential for also other European countries. And this is especially true for those countries where the long-lasting establishment of every area of life is linked to an integration of every human activity into labor. And as for Ukraine, the assessment of, maybe that's also a new name, maybe not also for the non-Ukrainians, the assessment of the Lviv historian Yaroslav Gritsak expresses it most aptly. In Ukraine, history is coming back. So somehow maybe even stronger, through Ukraine, history is coming back. So what conditions action? And in some way, we in our space have to speak both about being born and also death. So the 2 points we are talking about, death and being born, I think for us it's important to discover both of those points. The war itself, so this is about death, the war itself lets us discover the existential dimension of being, of death as a possibility for us personally. Just as Heidegger describes it, the man dies, so in German it's man stirbt, so this one dies, really disappears in the face of the reality, the reality of death in which being stands. Being becomes a being related to its own death. And it is remarkable that paralleling the existential threat in Ukraine, the existential need for thinking comes back. Thinking in all forms is offered on all platforms, and this is what I've seen preserved. For example, a lot of educational platforms are offering learning of system thinking, design thinking, philosophical thinking, model thinking. And already in these offerings, it is not just about education in the sense of being educated, but about a certain energy, about the ability to move thought. But there is also a growing demand in society, this is what we perceive, for thinking almost in the Heideggerian sense, so pure movement, set free from any logical system. Thinking that moves within being itself, a way of thinking that transforms because it moves in relation to being and doesn't leave the realm of being by closing itself up in some discipline or method. And this makes a really interesting context, that there's societal demand for this discipline of thinking. Too early. So what is thinking as from inside of being, and how does it connect to natality? And what is the unique contribution of Hannah Arendт in all of that? And I think this is also, sorry for the long remark, but I think this, what I say now, I want this to be one of the central thoughts for this week. That thinking from inside being in relation to only its death misses another pole. And this pole, I think we would like to introduce as this pole of action. And we need to discover this pole just as intensively as we are forced to discover the other one, the pole of death. Asking about what makes our togetherness, we can discover with Hannah Arendт that we do not just live before the fact of human death, but also with the fact of humans being born into a common world, which is the fact of natality. And during the preparation for the summer school, we discussed how academia needs impetus from the people we called dіляться in Ukrainian, so practitioners. Academia has fallen behind and needs to find out what is actually happening in practice with all the questions that practice usually asks. In this sense, for me, for example, Andriy, who is sitting there, is one of the strong examples because he formulates the question very simple and clear for Ukraine. While defending, we also need to find out what holds us together. Around what does Ukraine unite? And the answer to this question can be found in just fixed nature of identity-forming attributes. Rather, it is living republicanism, a polyphony in which the meaning of togetherness is constantly renewed through action, even with the possibility of new meanings being born. So the wish to constitute a commonness, a togetherness, a new togetherness of Ukraine, and the continuity of togetherness of Europe draws our attention to the condition of the human story in its natality. What constitutes our common lives is a constant renewal. It is the disruption by the constant arrival of the foreign in the birth of new life, which unfolds in the course of its life story as speech and action. And that, it seems to me, is the even greater challenge for the European Union compared to Ukraine. The existential threat of Europe as a community seems not to be realized by it in a greater extent. And in numerous attempts to define what Europe is, there seems to be little belief that even in Europe, the birth of something new is taking place again and again, even today. My intuition tells me that certain syllables will be heard more frequently by us this week. For example, the syllable of inter, so inter-creating or inter-listening, or the syllable of co. We also had it in our plan, co-creation. And what I find intriguing is that in post-mass society and also post-totalitarian society, these prefixes of inter and co have practically are empowering and enabling to form something together, and they're less homogenizing and collectivizing. And this is actually, I think, quite surprising. This, even though those syllables are describing a togetherness, inter and co, in practice, I never experienced them as homogenizing. So when we are, for example, saying, oh, the school should be co-creative, I feel then in practice, it's really empowering for the individual to action, even though it is about a togetherness. This is maybe my entering point of natality and plurality to these topics, and Julia will continue with her points, and you already have this.
Hannah Arendт, Transformative Research and Ukrainian Context. It's a general framework that I was trying to look at my current report. And actually my starting point to do any activities in life and within academia as well is like inner questions. My observation that in modern academia it's not always the case. In many times researchers started to looking for lacunas in research and start to research this field, but this way never worked for me personally. And I guess it's very Ukrainian point, because just 2 weeks ago, together with Alexander and Nastya, we were at Wallace Theological Academy, and we realized that, for example, in Ukraine, we don't have any academic theology, but we do have public theology, because theology picked up the questions from the reality. For example, when we did have the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, so people have very strict question to the church as well. So from that point, church started to try to answer the question, to understand its own role within the Revolution of Dignity. So from that point, the public theology in Ukraine was born. And I guess what is going right now in Ukrainian context, we do have so many questions from the reality, and researchers and intellectuals trying to answer this question. So the way of research is like from the real, like in Ukraine, it's my assumption, actually it's a good, this school is actually a space where we trying to check is this assumption right or not, and what should we do from that point. So yeah, my dialogue with Hannah Arendt actually start with two questions that that actually came to me the last year. Yeah, and the first question started with my encounter with young Jewish girl who faced the atrocity of anti-Semitism in Amsterdam during the Second World War. Her name is Eti Hilesum, and by very random accident, she wasn't in a list of Jewish people that was created by Nazi regime in Amsterdam at that time. So she was not forced to go to the concentration camp, but she was asking what is my role within this current situation, and actually voluntarily she went to Westerbork, that is the transitional camp in the north part of the Netherlands, and she started volunteer there and to help people live their life. Like for many, it was the last days of their life in a better way as it possible. So yeah, and her diaries came to me by very random accident, and I was reading them during the winter. And 27th of January, this year came, and all the world was celebrating the 80th anniversary of liberation of Auschwitz. And in the same time, in the same conditions, that was election in Germany, and the right radical party AfD had their ratings up and up. In the same time, we do have neighbor Hungary with Viktor Orban. At the same time, we have the Freedom Party in the Netherlands that won the parliament election in 2023, I guess. And yeah, like I even not talking about the situation in the USA, for example. So yeah, and for me in that time it was kind of hypocrisy to celebrate the liberation of Auschwitz within such kind of conditions. So like my first question, like my assumption is that we haven't learned some lessons from Auschwitz and from that time, because very similar situation like repeat again and again. So my first question, which lessons from Auschwitz remains I learned by us today? Yeah, and the second question is personal one. Yeah, it's already the 4th year of full-scale war in Ukraine, and it's already 12th year from the year that was started by occupation of Crimea and Donbass in 2014. And for a very long time in Ukraine, we are having the image of perfect Ukrainian as Cossack, we can see it very clearly, like when we are looking at Ukrainian art, at Ukrainian like picture or something like that from artists, because the same as 400 years ago, and right now, like we can see the motif in Ukrainian art that the mother sent off her son into the war, and she's very proud of it. So yeah, like because of our neighbor, Russia, and because I would say in general, in this imperialistic notion into the world, we do have a picture of perfect Ukrainian that is defender, but is in the same time it is destroyer, because he needs to destroy the evil that is existing in the world. Yeah, but when I'm thinking about my own future, I don't want to send my son off to a war, but I do want he has a possibility to contribute to the world into some kind of creative work, like to be, I don't know, a painter, an entrepreneur, a doctor, and to have a possibility and no needs to save people's life, but not to take it in order to other people have possibility to live their own life, actually. So yeah, my second question, what should me personally and my generation do today for having an image of perfect Ukrainian as creator but not destroyer? And yeah, when these two questions, I started my dialogue with Hannah Arendt. And while reading her text, I felt lots of resonance with lots of her ideas, but it took quite a long time for me to understand how my academic topic and academic research I work with connected with Hannah Arendt. But then I suddenly took a book by Samantha Rose Hill, an American researcher of Hannah Arendt, and she starts her book with the description of Hannah's childhood. And there is a quote from this book. Familiar with the writings of Goethe and Humboldt on educational philosophy, Martha, Hannah's mother, wanted to make sure Hannah received a proper upbringing. This distinctly German notion of a Bildung, or education, as a form of socialization and self-cultivation, was instilled in all good middle-class citizen. In the 1790s, Bildung had become a secular social idea corresponding to experience of the bourgeoisie and aristocracy, offering a philosophy of education for individual success, while in the same time demanding a reconsideration of social relationship. And then I realized, because like I do, like my one of the angles that I do my research is Nordic Bildung, or Folkbildning in Swedish. And then I realized that, yes, of course, like I should ask Hannah Arendt my educational questions that I work with. And although Hannah Arendt doesn't claim herself as a professional educator, I also found in her text the description how she considers education that for me like is perfect and very essential description what actual education is. So Hannah Arendt writes, education is the point at which we decide whether we love the world enough to assume responsibility for it, and by the same token save it from that ruin which, except for renewal, except for the coming of the new and young, would be inevitable. And education too is where we decide whether we love our children enough not to expel them from our world and leave them to their own devices, not to strike from their hands the chance of undertaking something new, something unforeseen by us, but to prepare them in advance for the task of renewing a common world. And this point of renewal, it is the same, it is like connected what Masha said about natality and about this possibility and conditions that every time we are stepping into disclosure of a man, we renew, like by our speech and by our action, we renew the world and we offer to the world the new version of it. So yeah, thus to implement such kind of education, Arendt offered us two-step formula. The first step is on a personal level, that is disclosure of the agent. And to my consideration, education is, or at least should be, the process, the ongoing process of the disclosure of the agent. And what does it mean for Hannah Arendt, this disclosure of the agent? From one side, there is a word or speech. Speech is the way in which a person appears to other, in which one shows oneself to the world and to the people. In this way, a person becomes a visible part of the world within interpersonal relationship. The speech allows us to appear in the world not as a function, not as a particular role, but as a unique personality, as I or who. But this I would be empty without the second part, an action. Speech, in its essence, is a way to talk about an action, explains its motives, meanings, and affiliation. Action is a way to participate in the world. That's an attempt to make one's own contribution into our common web. So the real world or speech is the only embodied word. Action in combination with speech, in turn, is an embodiment of freedom. And thus, human being both finds out who, one's own who, and shows this who into the world by one's own embodiment of freedom. Okay, I already felt. Yeah, and this is the second step of education for Hannah Arendt is a political realm. It's about weaving this who that we disclosed on the first step into the web of relationship. Arendt argues that there is no such thing as inner freedom per se. Inner freedom is a kind of escapism. We are going into a realm of inner freedom only when we feel alienated from the world, and usually when the world can't offer to us any kind of freedom. That is in case of totalitarian society or just like any kind of one-sided society that can be a country, an institution, when there is space in between that doesn't allow plurality. So we have like a person that has intention to reveal one's own freedom somehow. So one needs to go into the inner realm and doesn't show up this inner who to the world. Thus, we need the space in between us that should be pluralistic toward the different unique whos, who by their speech and action weave one's own thread into a fabric that one doesn't create oneself. And the realm of freedom is always a political freedom, that is an offering of the speech and action of human being into the world. Politics, in the sense of the ancient polis, had the goal of creating and preserving a space where freedom can act as virtuosity. And liberalism, Hannah Arendt asserts, has driven freedom out of the political sphere. Politics must be concerned almost exclusively with maintaining life and protecting its interest which can be controversial to the process of disclosure of who. And actually the presupposition of the disclosure of who is a capacity of making a judgment. Arendt considers the capacity crucial for understanding why in Germany with so rich intellectual and philosophical tradition, while Nazi regime with Hitler came, many of intellectuals, that is Heidegger or Wagner or Rosenberg, they supported the Nazi regime. And Hannah Arendt explains it that the process was very simple. The German educational system forgot about one simple capacity, the capacity of making one's own judgment. So that's why like the situation with Nazi regime was so simple and possible in the previous century. And the same with Adolf Eichmann that Nastya mentioned. After the court process in Jerusalem, Arendt didn't call him devil or evil or any other, but she claims that he rather is nobody. And like because he isn't able to make his own judgment and simply think. And this shows the banality of evil, because like little Eichmann can live within each of us and can show up every time we are lazy or we refuse to make one's own judgment. That means to distinguish the good from bad. And through this freedom of judgment, we refuse disclose our who to the world. So that's why the evil is not what Hannah Arendt did. She actually ruined the myth of greatness of evil. She said that evil is very simple and is very banal because there is no deepness in it. So only beauty, only goodness can be radical, can be deep. And how does it help to solve my question I started with about Auschwitz and about idealization of warrior archetype in Ukrainian culture? Actually, I don't have the final answers to this question, and I step into the school with these questions that I'm going to have in my mind during this week, but I have two assumptions. And the first one is about attentiveness. In order not to surrender the banality and being able to make one's own judgment, to make a distinction between good and bad, and through that to weave our common fabric, we need to be attentive. We need to be attentive to the particular fabric that we are part of, and we need to be attentive to the process of disclosure of other who's, and give this space in between for this disclosure. And the education that puts in the center the notion of attentiveness could probably help us, do not allow us to have needless people in the world, because this notion of needless people is one of the main reason of why Auschwitz was possible, and not to violate a fundamental principle of human existence, plurality, that Masha speaks about. And the second, my point, is the notion of commitment. Contemporary particular writer William Gelson describes the problem of modern education in this way. The greatest threat to children in modern society is not that they will believe in something too deeply, but that they will believe in nothing very deeply at all. And we do live in the liberal idea, and usually teachers in the school, they are very cautious not to impose their own ideas into children and give children space to make their own judgment, their own ideas, and to have their own important, essential notions that they would like to embody. But the problem that this notion, this like very cautious behavior goes into the space when we are not able neither make one of judgment and neither and just being very neutral. And Masha also said that the real thinking is not thinking about something, but thinking something by our whole mind, heart, and body. So for me, commitment is an antidote for this prevailing neutrality, and exactly the notion where speech with one's own judgment and action are inseparable. And by relating with our mind, heart, and the whole body to something bigger than us, we do make our daily choice. Are we contributing by that into the realm of creation or destruction? And that's our choice we make every day of our life. Thank you.